Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second ever STEM Fairs workshop. Today, we will be talking about the second stage of science fairs, from how to come up with from going from an idea to how to actually make your project come to life, to the methodology of your project, to breeding innovations, testing innovations, to doing experiments. We'll cover it all. And today we are joined by our wonderful guest speakers, Thong and Yuri, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Yuri. I'm from Saskatchewan, specifically Saskatoon, and I'm currently a grade 12 student.
My name is Thong. I am a grade 11 student in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
And I'm Prabnur, your Prime Minister, and today I'm joined by Prithviraj, our other guest host, who I'll let introduce himself.
Well, hello, my name is Prithviraj Singh, and I'm the current acting STEM Minister of the Discord platform.
Okay, we'll get started with some questions today, and then at the end of the session, the audience will also have the opportunity to ask their questions. So, our first question is, what is the difference between an innovation and discovery project? Sometimes it feels like innovation projects require some discovery components, and it feels like your project could really fit into any category.
Want to go ahead, Thong, or should I start?
No, you can go first.
Okay, so to me, I find an innovation project something where you create something that's out of your own imagination, something that's not existed before. Well, discovery project is where you basically discover something that something's already existed, but you go and make your way out and find that thing.
I just add on to that. I think that discovery projects and innovation projects have a lot in common, and some of the best projects that I've seen at the Canada-wide Science Fair incorporate aspects from both discovery and innovation projects. So I think you really have to consider, I guess, what the main scope of your project is. But if you can combine, I guess, factors from both innovation and discovery. So, for example, maybe you make some sort of discovery about a problem and then you innovate in order to solve that problem. That gives you a really strong project, I'd say.
Definitely. There is definitely some like overlapping between them. So our next question is, how do you go from an idea to making your project come to life? Specifically, how do you start a project where you have no background knowledge about the topic?
Well, I'll say this for all my projects, the idea was probably the hardest part of the project. It took me a long time, I'd say weeks or even months. And how I got those ideas was through reading the news or reading articles or magazines. And that's how I got my idea. After that, what you really just want to do is break down your project into small steps. And in the beginning, if you don't know anything about your project, there's always good resources online. I learned a lot through YouTube or through Reddit or even Discord. But I know other people go through a different path, which would be finding a mentor. So I think that'd be your very first step. And after that, you just break your project in smaller and smaller components and go from there.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. I think that, like, for my project specifically, I usually tend to focus on like a problem that personally affects me, because that way I'm able to, like, really connect with the issue and therefore understand all the different I guess factors that are contributing to that problem. So, but like when I find a problem and I want to learn more about that problem and see ways I can research the issue, I'll go into like Google Scholar, those sort of websites in order to, like, I guess, gain a deeper understanding of the subject.
Yes. And how do you understand what you're exactly trying to do? Like sometimes students have like an idea of the problem they want to solve, but they don't exactly know what they're trying to accomplish. Like, how do you figure out your first steps?
I would say when I was starting my first project for the Canada-wide Science Fair, that was the hearing aid device that I made back in grade 10. I consulted with a few people who were in the blind and deaf community. I talked to them about their daily struggles, what they were most struggling with, and how I could, or maybe someone else, could invent something to help their daily life. So I am a person who mostly does innovation projects. I mostly innovate or try to invent new things. So for me, if you're someone that's going around this route, I would talk to people who are struggling with something that your project deals with and go from there. Or even look at the news, look at society, look at history, see what people have done in the past, and sort of get your influence from there as well.
Yeah, I think starting a project with an idea is a really large step of the process, and really takes a lot of courage in order to take that step. But I think sometimes it's great to really just talk to people. Like start with a really big idea and connect with maybe other students in your school or other teachers in your school or like really anyone in your community. For example, like researchers at the local university or like any person who you think may be able to give you ideas, I guess. So basically, if you have an idea, just go talk to people and like try and get their input for your idea and like really strengthen your idea before you finally choose what project you're going to conduct.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Thong there. Just to add on to this question, to the last question, I just want to emphasize that there's nothing really stopping you from doing a science or STEM project. You can, if your school doesn't offer a science fair, you can always individually sort of register. And if you don't know something, there's always people out there willing to help you, whether that be through online, through your school, or even outside of school, extracurricular wise. So I think just always keep that in mind that it's kind of in your own hands and you really can make a science fair project become successful or even just take a start in it.
Yeah, anything is definitely possible with science fairs and like STEM fairs. And our next question is, how do you actually start your project and what parts does your project need? I'm guessing this involves things like the scientific process and the design process. And we actually want to hear about some of the projects that you did and how you went from start coming up with an idea to at the end having this really cool project.
Hmm. Do you want to start this one?
Sure. uh I think that like I'll just use my last project as an example, right? So what I did was I basically was like investigating microplastics in the South Saskatchewan River, which was an issue that I was passionate about. I had a lot of care about in our community. Basically, how I started was I did some background research on the topic using Google Scholar, and just Google in general, and so basically using those sorts of sites to find more information about the issue, find sources of the issue, make sure that there is actually an issue, because that's also the other thing you have to consider. Like, is your issue actually an issue? Basically, going through those paths of finding more about the problem, and then I contacted researchers at the University of Saskatchewan. Um, basically asking them for their guidance and advice, and if I could use their facilities and their equipment and their materials and those sort of things, basically. And then from there, we talked more. We talked about how we could like refine my project because there's a lot of different components that you have to consider, such as making your hypothesis, making your methodology, and finding out how you're going to basically control all those variables. I think once you actually start the project, it gets really overwhelming because there's a lot of things and different factors that you have to consider all at the same time. And I think in order to combat this, you sometimes it's nice to just sit down with a notebook, like write out every single thing you have, or like type out everything you have, and then go back and like refine your ideas and turn them into sentences that actually make sense. And basically from there, you can keep reaching out to people. Like even once you have a mentor, it's also important for you to keep reaching out to other people in the field so you can get their input on the issue, basically. Um, but then from there, once you actually get started, I'd say that it becomes really fun. Like, and you're definitely gonna have parts where it feels really challenging with all the factors, all the variables, or all the errors that you're getting, or you might not even get results that you expect, and that's kind of part of the science for project because you have to adapt your project around that. Because for my project, basically, in the 2024 Canada-wide Science Fair, I discovered that there was an increase in microbial activity on microplastics near the wastewater treatment plant. That wasn't the original scope of my project. Like, as researchers, when you find more information, you kind of have to adapt your idea and adapt your research around that, around what you find. And then, you can find some really, I guess, like interesting content based on what you and the other people who've worked with you have found.
Yeah, I completely agree with Thong. I'm not really necessarily a researcher. I'd say I'm more of an inventor. And I kind of went through this project a bit solo. And I would say that no matter what path you take for science fairs, do it like as soon as possible. Try to get like your mind thinking about what project idea you want to do. Try to get the sort of brainstorming stages out of the way, because in the beginning, initially, you'll think that the science fair project is quite easy. You'll think that, oh, maybe I take a couple of few steps here, I can get very far along. But as soon as you start it, you'll notice that there's like ups and downs along the way, and a lot of times there are a lot more downs than ups. So really extends your project to be longer than you thought it'd be, or maybe even a lot more complicated. So start as soon as possible. And that's kind of one big advice I'd have. Yeah, for me, I would, first of all, I would think about my idea. I would talk to people who are in the industry or who struggle with sort of what my project deals with. Then I refine that idea a bit more. For me, I make a lot of prototypes in the beginning. I sort of have a 3D printer, so I design things and go from there. But recently, I had a project where I was trying to innovate on a underwater search and rescue robot. Originally, I thought this was really easy, great idea. But as soon as I broke this project down into its components, I realized this was going to be quite complicated. I had to deal with the physics, I had to deal with the mechanics, and the digital part of it too, the programming. So I just split this components up to different parts and work from there individually on each one. Yeah, so that's how I would do it. I just break it down and then try to go the most detail into each component as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And building on that question, once you like actually break down your idea and you realize that's really big, it might be like very challenging. How do you decide whether it's possible or not with the current resources you have? How do you know like where to draw the line between, okay, I can do this, this is a good project scope, or maybe this is like too big and I need to narrow down?
Mm. I would say that if you are lucky enough to have a mentor, always go that path as well. I went a bit solo, and I would say from my experience, I don't know necessarily. To me, I always think that technology is changing, but there's also a large community online. So that's why I thought it'd be okay to stay with a solo project and go from there. I was really active in different Reddit communities and on YouTube as well, learning from these different sources. But you can also consult, your teacher. And I had a good robotics teacher when I was doing this project last year. So, I learned a lot through that class as well. And I think that's why I made the ultimate decision to stay solo. I thought it was something that I could do. It's a big challenge, but I knew that I could get through it.
I always think it's never a bad thing to be really too ambitious, because you can always refine a more detailed idea from your really big idea, right? So, for example, when I started the project, like when I got last year's project, I was incredibly ambitious. I wanted to do like a lot, basically. And there's definitely times where, after reading things online, reading the methodology, you see that, PhD students who are doing this sort of thing don't even have enough time to conduct all of this, because for my project, I had to do field research, which I had to like plan that around the weather before it snowed. I had to do a ton of lab work and a ton of like bioinformatics analysis. And basically, you can never really be too ambitious. At the same time, there are people all around you who can really help you to refine down a more specific idea. Like, even if you don't necessarily like want a mentor, or like even if you don't necessarily like, I guess, like need a mentor for like their lab space or any of their materials, you can always ask people in your industry or in your research field, to give you ideas and advice in order to refine down your large idea into a smaller idea. Because depending on what you find in the small idea, you can always continue that project for next year or in your university career, and always expand on that concept, I guess.
I agree. When I was making my project, I think I definitely went a bit over ambitious, because even universities that were trying to do something similar to my project were doing it for years, and they hadn't really gone to the part where they wanted to be at. And I think what my dad also told me was that he said that even if Elon Musk had like a whole staff employees, they might not even be able to make this ambitious dream that I had. But even then, I still kept doing with this project. And eventually, I landed with a pretty good prototype. I was able to enter in some competitions and win as well. So do that, make some prototypes. It doesn't have to be your ultimate dream where you want to be in the end. That can take years. But start with something, start with a prototype. Even that is crazy impressive, especially for a high school student or middle school student.
Yeah, the important part is like definitely to just like try and do something. And yeah, you can never be too ambitious. um, So my third question is about troubleshooting, and I'll actually pass it on to Prithviraj now.
Okay. So my question was like, how do you identify potential issues in methodology? Like, if there's a method, then how do you like troubleshoot it? What is some possible issue which you find?
For
Yeah,
me,
so okay, you can go first.
no, actually, go ahead, Tom.
Okay, no, because I think when it comes to troubleshooting methodology, there's really different types of troubleshooting. For example, I would be more used to like research troubleshooting and those sort of things. While Yuri would have a lot more experience in like troubleshooting her prototypes and how to like essentially improve them over time. But for me personally, I would say when it comes to troubleshooting, sometimes you have to actually like try it out and like, see if it works. Because for my first idea, what I had to do was I had to make these biofilm samplers that like collected biofilm on microplastics. Basically, I had to like basically what I did was I actually like started making prototypes and just seeing and like essentially like finding the pros and cons of each idea and then eventually finally choosing prototype that I liked to actually put on the river and use as my field sampling apparatuses. And I think when it comes to methodology, like there are some obvious variables that you can very obviously tell could go wrong, but at the same time, there are some other smaller ones which could really affect the result of your experiment. I think sometimes it's really nice to just have a chat with a mentor or a teacher or really anyone or even a friend to basically go through your idea, go through what you're doing, and then we basically gonna like find like any holes in your project that could appear because for me especially like in my last project my methodology was not soundproof. Like I don't think there's any research out there that's completely 100% soundproof with like a perfect methodology and perfect results, right? I think that's kind of the thing you have to appreciate about research because if there are errors in your methodology, then you're like discovering something new. You're discovering how to make something better over time, which is a part of the science fair process, right? I think just realizing that having errors in like when you actually start conducting a project and you find errors in your methodology or places that went wrong, you can always talk about that to the judges because they really like hearing about those sort of things. They like hearing about how you went through different trials and errors to basically get to the final project you landed on.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like when I started my first initial draft, my project, my first design, I actually like my final prototype was very different than the first one. I would say that for me, especially in terms of innovation projects, you can't really know if what you're doing is soundproof without like trying. Just as Thong said, you really have to go ahead and make those first few prototypes, make those first few designs to really know if your technology works or if you need to invest in something new. And I think one way that you can make this part a bit more easier would be to search up what people have done in the past. There's sometimes similar projects that different universities or other researchers or inventors have done in the past, and you can see what they went wrong, use some of their advice and use some of their sort of challenges there and go from that. And yeah, just as Thong said, communicate with the community. There's always a large community in science. Talk to your teachers if you can, or friends that have some knowledge on this stuff too. So yeah, communication is a big factor, but also just go ahead and try to design some first few prototypes and get that sorted out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, let's say like your innovation experiment is like not working as expected. What do you do? Like, what if you run into a problem that you don't know how to resolve? Or like, what are some resources that you can consult for additional support in troubleshooting your project?
I would say take a break. I would like sometimes science fairs. This is why I recommend that you give yourself a lot of time to work on a project because at the end, you're trying to meet deadlines and you're really stressed. You're trying to get things keep going. But I always say take a breather, like take a day off, maybe take an afternoon off, and really think about it. Sometimes when you're too busy, you make some rash decisions that actually can hinder a project and like put yourself a step backwards. So I would do that first. For me, I really all I did was consult with communities online. Um, I would really recommend. There's a couple YouTube channels that I recommend. I would recommend people like Mark Rober. That's one guy that I watch, and I get some good ideas from him. But I also watch channels called like Great Scott. These are two channels that I would recommend for innovation projects. They're heavily into like electronics, but also into some other fields as well. So yeah, these two channels I would heavily recommend. And in terms of Reddit, I kind of just go across subreddits, whatever my project deals with. I say my project is pretty diverse in the science scene. I use like physics, programming, machine learning. So I kind of just delve into those subreddits as well and ask questions there. There's always a generous community that's willing to help you. So yeah, use it.
Yeah, I'd say that I really agree with what Gary said because in any project I feel like you're gonna encounter like roadblocks in the way and like obstacles in your course basically. And those are things that are important. Like these aren't things that you should try and hide when you're presenting your presentation because these will show the judges that you have an authentic project. You started from a large idea, you refined it down, you found errors and roadblocks in your design or your methodology, and then you took steps in order to resolve those issues. And that's really what science fair is about. So I think kind of like by you can kind of like I guess like cherish these mistakes because they're all little steps along a really large journey to a completed science fair project. I think that these little mistakes are, really great things to remember as essentially like essentially like what Yuri said. You have a really big community. You can always ask people to figure out things, and you should really take advantage of the community.
Okay. And like, how will you adapt like your experiment or innovation based on your initial findings?
Ooh, good one. So I would use an example from my last year's project. Last year, my underwater robot, it had a lot of problem or a lot of concerns regarding sort of water and concealing all the electronics inside the robot. So initially, what I did was I just tested the robot itself, no electricity, with the electronic components inside and water, and see how that worked. And then afterwards, I'd be like, "Oh, the robot's like full of water. What do I do?" I would take a look at the sort of physical aspect of it. What went wrong in my design? I would conceal sort of patents. I would look online for those, or even look online for how they make submarines, things like that. Like it's really ambitious. I'm not necessarily building a whole military submarine, but they have used a lot of technology that can be applied into my robot as well. So I took a look at that, and even taking a look at the submarines, I learned that they use ballast tanks, which is what makes submarine go up and down. And I kind of took that technology as well and put it in my robot. So I would say that if you counter a mistake, it's really part of the scientific process. Just take a look at your design, maybe some areas that might be a little bit iffy. Look at what people have done in the past. They could have done projects that are way more ambitious than yours, but you can always take away a good component from their project and implement that into your project as well. So it really is just part of the scientific project. And another thing to add is that I think that, if you counter a challenge, don't really give up. And I think that the more challenges you actually counter make I guess, the significance of project better. Because in the end, when you're done with your project, you think about all the times where you almost gave up and you're like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I didn't. And I think it just makes that much, much more valuable.
Yeah, so I really agree with everything that Yuri just said, and basically just adding on to her points. I'd say that when you have a project and when you have a discovery, it tends to be a feeling that you have to like kind of like conceal this information before the fair, where there's like some of that competitiveness factor kicks in. But sometimes it's really okay to just talk to other people and like find ways that you can, I guess, wrap your new project based on your initial findings because like for like almost none of my projects I'd say that it's really hard to actually find the results that you were expecting at the in the first time basically, right? Because like your hypothesis may be like partially true, and that's where having someone like a mentor or a teacher is really helpful to basically, I guess, like wrap your ideas around the data that you collected and present it in a way that's interesting for the judges basically, right? Because I think it's really hard to actually perfectly find hypothesis that you predicted at the start, which is why it's kind of crucial for you to have like flexibility and able for it's essentially for you to be able to like adapt to your project, I guess, based on what your initial findings are.
And like many people like face like issues or like are confused with like what is logbook, what should I put in my logbook, and what parts, like what are the some key components does a like good logbook have? Like what do you think? What's your thoughts?
Oh,
Oh, okay. I think when you have a discovery and an innovation project, you're gonna have two very different logbooks, basically, right? Because like my logbook is definitely gonna have very different types of components than yours, but like because my projects are mainly like discovery ones, I guess. But what I'd say is just write everything in your logbook, like every single trial you've done, every single detail you've done about it, any thoughts that you've had during doing any of those trials. I think that you could basically just like put all that information. Think of a logbook as you putting all that information into a singular book, so you can always refer back to the information if required. If you need to like repeat a trial, for example, or if you need to like uncover some information that you found in the past. I think basically in my logbook, I have methodology, I have results, I have any errors I found during the way, and basically just put all of your thoughts into that book because it really shows that your project is basically authentic, I guess. Because then by having all that information in your logbook with those dates, you're basically proving to the judges that you took time out of your day, out of your busy schedules to do a science fair project, and you found errors, and you're willing to talk about those errors and those mistakes along the way to reach the final project, right? So I think making sure that you have a lot of information in your logbook is important to have when you're doing a science fair project or really any project in general.
100% agree with Thong. Like, honestly, just put absolutely everything you can. Think of a logbook, kind of like a diary. Put all your challenges in there. Put all your successes in there. What I did was I really like every couple of days I would just log what I did for those 2 days. That's what I did, and I would put all my prototype designs in there. I put my code designs in there. Some of the errors I went through, how I necessarily built my prototypes. Because then as I go down to the scientific route, if I make a mistake, I can look back at what my design was, point out some errors, and then look way closer into that. So think of it like as a diary. You really can never have too much information in a logbook. It's for you, for your future self. So honestly, like write down everything. More specifically, I wrote down the materials I use for my prototypes like daily. If that changed at all, I would write down me testing different materials, the pros and cons of that, so that I could compare those to future materials that I test. And obviously, my blueprints are in there, and as well as my successes and my fails for each test trial that I had.
And like, what if you don't have like a right resources? Like many town or like many areas doesn't have like like specific like labs and everything for your research and for your experiments. So how do you like overcome this?
Uh, I never really had a lab or a mentor. Really, my lab is just my room, so it's just the space right here. That is my lab. I had to use my bed, almost like my bed area was also my lab. I would sleep on the couch, like that was my lab. So you really can still make a science fair project without a supervisor or without a formal lab, I guess. But also, like, take that with a grain of salt. Like, let's say you're like Thong and you're doing some research and you require certain materials. That can be quite expensive. Like, obviously, go try and find a lab. I would say that if you, depending on what you do, you can usually find people that are willing to help you, especially as a student. So contact those companies that are around you, contact universities, your high school, or even middle schools. There's teachers, there's equipment there. They usually someone's going to try to help you at least. And if you can't do that, try to sort of take out a budget, maybe invest in something like 3D printers, like a laptop, and have like a homemade lab type of situation. And again, like always, you can consult the online community for aid and help.
Yeah, so I'd really agree with that. I think that some of the best projects I've seen at Canada-wide Science Fair are, the projects that really don't require too many specialized resources. People with just a microscope in their room, or people like Yuri who have their lab in their room, right? I think that sometimes you have to find ways to adapt around any challenges you have in regards to accessing resources. Because, like Yuri said, you have many people who are around you who are always able to help you. For example, teachers in schools. For example, maybe your school has the equipment that you need, or maybe your school has some sort of like greenhouse, if that you could use for project basically, or maker spaces are also a good space because I know they also have like 3D printers and those sort of things. And even if you do live in a town with really limited resources, like for example, like if you wanted to do some like really specialized project and you didn't have the resources in your town, like for example, during COVID, I was obviously unable to go into lab, so therefore, I got the researchers at the research institution to send the supplies to my school. So they therefore, like basically, my classroom was the lab because they sent the materials over, they sent all the resources over, and I was able to like conduct all the experiments inside the classroom. And basically, there's always people who are out there that are willing to help you as long as you can, make those sort of connections and like interact with people because they can always send resources over if you really need them.
And like, do you have any specific advice for students who want to like do STEM, or like, but they're hesitant because they think that they don't have like a right skill or like right resources? And what do you think? What's your advice?
I would say like just do it, really. Like in the beginning, I thought that machine learning was very, very daunting. I mean, I thought that you can really only do a project that involves machine learning, for example, at the PhD, master's, or bachelor's level. Like, you had to be at a post secondary institution to get a start. And then when I was starting to do it, I realized it wasn't like as bad as I thought it was. And I developed kind of a passion for it. So, really, just start. You never know what it will bring you, like what path they'll bring you down, whether it, brings a passion to it as well. I mean, like, think of it, right? Athletes, they play sports, and had they never started playing that sport, would they really have had like a passion and gone down that path that they would have? Probably not. So, you know, just try, honestly, try a lot of things. I tried a lot of things in the beginning of my science career, and I ended up sort of settling on something I really, really like. You might not like some things, you might like others. Like, I don't like biology necessarily, but I'm glad I kind of gave that a shot as well. I learned some things too. So yeah, there's never really a harm. You'll gain sort of knowledge and advice regardless if you like it or not. So yeah.
I really agree with what you're saying. So, because you really do, when you start a science fair project, gain knowledge over a period of time. For example, like when I was in grade 8, I started my first science fair project, right? And I started like from a really, really small project. So that involved like caterpillars, like talking about plants, and basically just like testing out pesticides and those sort of things, right? And you sometimes you just gotta start small, and then you can learn more about your concepts as you get on, right? Because now, like, if I told my grade self that I am now, in a specialized lab doing things like DNA extraction and PCR and gel electrophoresis, I would not be able to believe that. But I think you definitely gain skills um, over time by learning the things that you learn from your science fair project. And as you develop those skills, you can make more specialized projects over time. I think that's what's important because you don't always have to start with a huge, like grand, extravagant project. But as long as you start somewhere, you're starting your path on building your skills over time, which is a really valuable asset to have in life, I'd say.
Definitely. I agree too. Like, you just have to like start and try something, and like really anything is possible with science fairs. Okay, now it's time for our audience to ask questions. You can either like type in the chat or you can like request to speak. There's a button to request to speak somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where it is. There's some typing going on. Our first question is, do you have any tips for reaching out to professors slash cold emailing?
I would say I didn't really do much emailing to professors. Again, I didn't have a mentor, so there was no need for me to do it. And you can always attach a resume to your email, a LinkedIn, even if you have it. Any experience or any interest you have, try to show it through that email. But I think, yeah, Thom will probably have more experience with this than me.
That's probably got to be one of my favorite questions ever. The amount of work that you have to do in order to get a professor is absolutely mind-boggling, I'd say. Because for my first science fair project, I had to send emails to over 100 professors, I'd say. So it took I'd say like an entire month or so. But like what happens is that basically you'll cold email those professors with your like your idea, some information about yourself, any like past experience you might have, that even if it's like social experience, so like volunteering with other organizations basically. And those people are going to refer you to people who they think are more specialized in that area. Eventually, you're going to go down a referral loop, I'd say, where you keep getting referred and referred and referred until you find one professor who really knows your topic, basically. And that person is going to do everything that they can to essentially help you with your project. I think that's the kind of the nice thing, because you build a community, you're making connections just by cold emailing, you're getting to know the professors in your area and those sort of things. And I think that's kind of like the joys of science fair, because you get to meet more people, you get to really understand the type of research that they're about, and if you want, you can even like adapt your original idea to more fit within the capabilities of a professor's lab, because then they might be able to help you more. So I'd say that, you know, sometimes when you're cold emailing, you really have to be like confident in your abilities. Like send out those mass emails, send out dozens of emails, and over the years you're gonna gain experience. So every time you get a new mentor, it's gonna be so much easier. Because in my first year, I sent like over like 100 emails. In my second year, I had to send I'd say about like 40 or 50. And then my third year, I found one in like just within a couple of emails. So as you build that experience, as you gain more skills, doing science fair projects, then people are really more likely to like, I guess, help you, because they know that you've had experience doing this, and they really know that you're passionate about these sort of issues.
Definitely. And you can also like try emailing labs sometimes. I know instead of like a specific professor, like here at the University of Alberta, we have something called the Blink Lab. So emailing the overall lab can sometimes also help. Um, Another question about mentors. I've been searching for a mentor in my area, in my research area for a month, but there aren't many people in the field. My science teacher can't help either. Do you have any tips for finding a good mentor, or are aware of any websites where I can connect with professionals who respond to students online?
I have personally, I've never done this, but I have heard of people who offer online mentorship, and I would try to take a look at those. So I would take Thong's advice, take that wholeheartedly, and email professors and talk to them about your situation. Talk to them that you're in a remote area that doesn't offer maybe as much mentorship as other areas, and see if they're willing to do sort of like a remote mentorship. And I've actually heard people do this before. I had a friend, Kathy, who I believe did this a couple years ago as well with a mentorship in Toronto, and she was living in Saskatchewan. So think of it like that. And to add on to Dong's advice, I would also say that there are certain programs that you can apply for. I know MIT has one like RSI that's pretty coveted, so try to look into those and apply to those as well. And over the summer, I also did a program in London called LICEF, and I know Prof. Noor did one as well. So take a look at those programs, and you can usually meet pretty cool professors, people in these industries, and you're kind of already building these connections in person. So you can take that further step forward and try to see if they offer any mentorships in online as well.
Yeah, I think it just adding on to that, I think that, you know, exactly like what Dory said, you know, I'm sure that there's always people who are willing to like remotely mentor you. Like for example, for my last science fair project, I reached out to people not just in Saskatchewan, not just in Canada, but also to like but also in like internationally. So I was like contacting researchers in the United States. I was contacting researchers in countries in Europe, and basically by just making those connections, you can find people who are really specialized, because you might find one research paper that really correlates with your project that you're really interested in, and just if you just send an email to those people, you can really learn a lot more about that topic, and then you can find basically like local people in your area who might have access to those sort of resources in order to be able to help you conduct a project, right? And I think that's kind of what science fair is about, is, you know, talking to people around the world, as essentially like being able to conduct a project, all the components of a project, to have a final project to present. So I think, you know, even if it's really hard to find a mentor like locally, try searching internationally too, and like try and get advice from those people too.
Definitely. And yeah, there's always someone out there who wants to help you. It might take a while to find them, but they're there. We have another question. A question for Yuri. When you were working on your 2023 CWSF project, how did you approach working with the deaf community and how did you test your innovation?
Okay, so this is a really good question. My grandfather has hearing impairments and he'd be considered deaf. So I talked to people in my family. I talked to him about his daily struggles. And one of the struggles that he brought up was working out outside, specifically going on runs. Because let's say you're deaf, right? You're trying to go for a run on, like, on a busy area. There's cars behind you, there's people everywhere. It's quite unsafe. Think of it like that. So I would talk to him, and that's something that he brought up to me, and I was like, oh, I never thought of that. So I consulted people that was in my family, and I also read magazines. I read magazines on deaf runners, and this was also a recurring problem that I saw. So yeah, talk to people in your circle, friends, family. Read on people who are struggling within these, but also ask questions online. And I know it's something I bring up a lot, but really utilize this sort of gift you have. You know, you have access to basically the world in your hands. So I know people ask questions on Reddit. That's something that I also did for my underwater robot. So do that. And then in terms of testing, what I did was I sort of found the variables that I could control and couldn't control. So the variables I could control was whether my participant was deaf or not. And now what I did was I used my sister. My sister is not deaf, but I basically gave her soundproof headphones so she couldn't, listen to anything. Nothing was sort of coming into her ears. So that's how I simulated deafness in my sister. So I brought that to her, and then what she would do is she would wear my hearing aid on her back. It's really confusing. My device was something you would wear on your back, and it was kind of like a hearing impairment device there. And I would do certain tests. Like I would test, like, let's say I was 10 meters away. If I was behind her, could she be notified that I was behind her 10 meters away, 5 meters away, etc.? That's how I did my tests. And then we did some tests where she was running, she was walking, etc. Did the same thing. And that's how I concluded my data for the most part.
Building on that question, how do you know, both for Thong and Yuri, how do you know what parameters of your like innovation you should be testing?
Parameters. So that's a really good question. I would say, first of all, look into the variables that your projects could have, like things that could potentially change the effectiveness, or the conclusions that you can take from your results. For me, for my hearing aid project, obviously I had to take into consideration of how deaf my person was, and sort of maybe even her like physical components, because my device used machine learning that could be sort of affected with biasness in the data. So think about that. It's really, I don't know. It really depends on what your project is on, but think about sort of what would affect the outcome of your project, if that makes any sense. For me, that was just really how deaf my participant was. Then I would go from there. All I really had to do was, it didn't matter how deaf my participant was, as long as my project could identify a human, then it'd be good. So my project wasn't too complex in that area, but maybe for Thong, it might be a bit more complicated.
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to like innovation versus discovery projects, that there are definitely different variables that you have to consider. So for my projects, so for my last project, I have to consider factors such as the temperature of the water during during field sampling. I had to consider methodology that I used during field sampling, essentially like adapt as I went, I guess. And there's definitely factors that can always affect your results. So like contamination and those sort of things that you don't even realize really until the end. I think that there are always these sorts of like little variables and little like little, I guess, like exceptions to your data. I think that these are, if you can think of them, these are things that you should bring up when you're presenting your project, because these really show the judges and the community basically that you considered all of the variables and you found that this may have affected your results, and you're being transparent with that. So I think there are definitely many different parameters and variables that can affect the final outcome of your project. And sometimes it's nice to just sit down and brainstorm about things that could be affecting it, and just write in your logbook. so you have information to talk about at the science fair, where the judges ask you, what sort of errors do you think you could make, or if you could go back, what would you change? So like, in order to answer those questions, that's sort of something you have to think about beforehand, about like all the parameters and variables that could affect the results, I think.
Definitely. And our next question is I've been told that it's important to have my methodology already planned out before reaching out to labs. Would you agree that this is important if I don't have a lot of lab experience? Would you agree that this is important? And then adding on to that question, if I don't have a lot of lab experience and don't know much about how to go about planning out an experience. One second, I said that wrong. Let me read it again. I've been told that it's important to have my methodology already planned out before reaching out to labs. Would you agree that this is important? If I don't have a lot of lab experience and don't know much about it, how to go about planning out an experiment.
Ooh. I would say discuss this with the professors. Like put that kind of in your email as well. You can take a note of it. I mean, you're a high school student or a middle school student, right? So it's not really expected that you have these incredible experiences, especially when you're just starting out. So if you're planning to go through the mentorship sort of path, tell your professors that, but also to sort of tell them like how passionate you are, your skills that you know that you have within science. Yeah, I don't know. I think Thought would definitely have more to add on to this for sure.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that Yuri said. I think that when it comes to the fact that you're starting science fair, and if you don't have too much experience beforehand, I think what's best to do is to do some background research, like just go on Google Scholar, and those sort of websites, and basically seeing what other researchers have done, seeing what methodology they've done, and basically trying to find out what the industry standard is for the methodology that you're trying to find, right? And then once you reach out to a professor who's willing to help you, those sort of people have specific equipment in their lab that might be able to do specific things, right? So I think that while you should have some background information of the methodology that you want to do before you reach out to professors, I'd say that just reaching out to a professor first with your like very basic idea before trying to like refine out all the small kinks of the methodology. I think that might be a bit more important. Just like having that connection with the professor first, because then you can just hop onto a Zoom call with them. You can talk with them for like an hour or two, and find ways how you can refine your project, how you can refine your methodology. They'll definitely maybe ask you if you have any methodologies or any ideas that you have in mind for conducting a project. But at the same time, you can just tell them about the background information that you found before, and then they can tell you what sort of equipment and resources that they have in their lab, and find how you can adapt your project to the resources that they have in their lab.
There's one more
I
question.
agree.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So there's one more question which someone asked, that how does participating in Canada White Science Fair like impact your like academic career and your career path which you chose to be? Yes, yeah.
I would say Canada Science Fair was a big change in my life. Beforehand, I hadn't really known much people that were doing what I was doing, like what I was sort of researching in or trying to innovate in. But once I got in Canada Science Fair, I could tell you, I could probably name you like 20 people that I know of that are kind of in my field. And yeah, we're still friends to this day, which is really crazy. I've even gone to trips that Canada Science Fair kind of sponsors or kind of selects people from. So like LISF over in London, I got to go and travel with people from Canada that were kind of in my field of researching, and that was really cool. So yeah, Canada Science Fair is crazy. You meet a lot of great people. Like I met Thong even through Canada Science Fair, and we're still great friends till this day. And yeah, they're people that you can collaborate in the future with. They're people that you learn a lot from with. And even in the future, Canada Science Fair, when you let's say you make it right, and you go there, in the future, you'll get a bunch of emails and you'll even get opportunities to go represent Canada or even do other sort of opportunities. Let's say ISEF, LISEF, or even the UCs. You have all these crazy opportunities, and now you have this great network that you can carry around and sort of, make your science career go on further. So, yeah, Canada Science Fair is great. You really sort of know that your passion is worth it, and you kind of have more. I don't know how to say this, but you have like your passion can bring you far places, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. I have a ton of great friends there, including Yuri at the Canada-wide Science Fair. I've gone 3 times now. It is an absolutely incredible community there. There are incredible people there. There are people who have projects across Canada who are all coming together in one place to show their passion for STEM projects. You have professors who are judging the projects who are devoting their and volunteering their time in order to give you advice on your project, give you ideas on ways to expand your project. I think the Canada-wide Science Fair is a really great place in order to connect with students across Canada, with researchers across Canada, as well as people from the industry. And I'd say that even for a regional science fair, because when you go to a regional science fair, there are dozens, or in some cases, for some people, even hundreds of other people there who are all really passionate about STEM fair projects, and they all have this goal of wanting to become more. They all have a common goal of wanting to do a STEM project, right? And I guess that's really what really brings you together. So I think even just participating in your regional science fair is a huge step in building the connections and gaining more knowledge in your field, I'd say.
Definitely, science fairs is like such an amazing community of people. Our next question is, when sending an email to professionals, what specific formatting and structure should I use to ensure my message stands out and captures their attention? Are there any particular elements I should include in the subject line, greeting, body, and closing to make my request more compelling? Additionally, any tips on length or style would be appreciated.
I think Thong would know this one for sure.
Oh, I love this question. Yeah, so I think that when it comes to email, there are definitely many ways you can customize it. But I'd say is mainly just keep it short. Keep it under 100 words. If you have your email at 100 words, I'd say that's a really good amount. Because as soon as you write really long emails, professors have busy lives, researchers have busy lives, and they don't have time to read your 500-word essay inside an email, right? I think that it's best to just keep your email short. Say who you are, say where you're from, say why you want to do this, your passion for it. Very briefly explain your idea, and basically they'll if they're interested in helping you, they'll send you an email back. They'll be like, let's chat about this, or you can come to my lab and we can chat about this. I definitely think like there aren't any particular elements, like you said, that I would recommend necessarily, but mainly just keep it short. And as long as you can keep your information concise, and as long as you can kind of prove to the professor or the researcher that you're really passionate about your idea, then I think that should be enough for people to want to support you. Because at the same time, even though a person might have the labs and all those sort of things, a professor might not have the funding required for your project, or they might not have any other students in their lab that are currently available in order to help you with their project, right? So I think these people are really busy individuals, and you want to basically get your message out as quickly as possible. So that's kind of what you have to keep in mind when you're sending an email, I'd say.
I agree. And we have one other question. Currently, I'm working on an innovation project that involves robotics and electronics, but my teammate and I are both busy. We also don't go to the same school. How would you approach working together as a team and dividing up the work in a situation like this? And also, I'm going to add on to this. What is your general advice for balancing science fairs, school, and other extracurricular activities?
Wow. Okay. This is kind of right up my alley. I love robotics. I love electronics. That's kind of what I do for science fairs. In terms of a team, I've never really done a science fair project where I've worked with a team. However, I know people who have. So what I'll tell you is, I don't. Is well, first of all, take my advice with a grain of salt. I guess I haven't really gone through experience. I wouldn't necessarily know. But from what I've heard, is you should do this first. Take your project, kind of have a methodology ready. Know that know what kind of what you'll need for your overall project, and then divide that up between you and your partner. Since you guys don't go to the same school, I would say that you guys can try to find a time where you guys can meet. each other, whether that be through the weekends or even through like something like Slack or Discord. Always try to communicate. Communication in terms of a team is probably the most important part you can do, and try to keep everyone on task. So, since you're working on a team, you have to, I guess, be more kind of structured with things. Have a schedule, know when you want your deadlines to be done, with you and your other team members. That'd be my advice in terms of a team project. And the other advice would be, or the other question was, how would I balance science fair and school? Now, this one I really like because school, as you kind of get older and older, you'll notice that school becomes more and more busy and you're expected a lot more. And science fair, as soon as you get to that very end of your science fair project, you'll see how complicated your project kind of becomes. So, how I think of it is, it's like school is kind of like a break from your science fair project, and same with the other extracurricular activities. So, noticing my science fair project, that was kind of all I really did. And I would take my breaks in terms of like going to school, doing other homework, or doing my sport like soccer, for example. So that's how I balanced it out. And to avoid sort of unnecessarily rush and unnecessary stress, really plan out, when you want your deadlines to be. Plan out what you want to do every single day. Do you want to allocate 2 hours today, 2 hours tomorrow, for example? Yeah, just try to plan it out, schedule it all out so you really don't become stressed. And yeah, talk to your teachers as well. Tell them about your situation. See if they can sort of alleviate your stress by, for example, giving you less homework. There's always ways to go around it. So yeah, good luck on that.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that Yuri said. For my grade 8 project, I had a partner, and it was a really fun time because it was a really big project. I definitely say that I would not have been able to complete that project without my partner. So I'm really thankful for that. But when you and your partner are working on a project that involves like physical components, so like robotics and electronics, so like what Yuri said, communication is like the key to all your problems. Like you need to be able to communicate with your partner. Like if you can't meet a deadline, you need to be able to communicate with your partner without feeling like ashamed or any of those sort of things, right? Basically, you need to be able to like feel free to talk to your partner at any time about the project, right? And it's also important to remember that when you're working on a team project or if you're working on a big project and you have other obligations such as school and other extracurricular activities, I definitely say it's always okay to scale back your project. It doesn't have to be as large as you originally planned it, and it's always okay to make a smaller one, make a more refined one, and you can always expand it next year or further in your career because now then you have that knowledge. You're not required or obligated to make a huge project. So it's always okay to take a step back, look at everything you've done so far, and maybe find ways that you can lighten up the load of the project. And for the second question, which was how do you balance the workload of science fair and school, that kind of ties into the first question, I guess, right? And it's basically it's always okay to take a step back and realize that you don't have the full amount of time for this project, and that's completely okay because if you don't at the same time, because how do I describe this in a way that makes sense? You could have a really big and ambitious idea that in your mind where you're like, if I can do this project, I'm gonna win all these awards, right? But at the same time, it's crucial to remember that it's better to have, in my opinion, a smaller project that was refined down and that's more complete rather than a really big ambitious project that's nowhere close to being complete, right? So I think just always remember that you don't have to do a big project and it's always okay to take a step back.
I agree. Do we have any last questions? I'll let you all think for a few minutes. Do our speakers have any last words of wisdom they would like to add?
I'd say don't be afraid. I've never heard of anyone who's ever regretted about going to science fair at all, or even trying a project at all. I've met people along the way who ended up in different fields than what they did for the science fair project, but did they regret it? Absolutely not. It's something that brings you an experience that nothing else can really bring you. Meet a lot of good people, and you sort of know what you like and what you don't like now, and you always gain knowledge, which is never a bad thing. So never be afraid to do it. Again, I've never met someone who's ever regretted. If anything, I've met people who regret not doing it. So yeah, just give it a shot.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, I don't think I've ever met a person who's regretted doing a science fair, right? Like, just go for it. It doesn't really matter what stage you get to. Like, if you get to Canada, the Canada-wide science fair, that's awesome. If you get to UC's or ICF, that's awesome. But like, if you just participate in a science fair, at your regional science fair, even in your school science fair, that is an incredible opportunity because it shows that you're taking the step in order to conduct a STEM project with millions of other youth across Canada, right? I think that just conducting a project just for the fun of it, like not even for a science fair project, is also really helpful. Like, basically, if you have an idea for a project, or what stage of the science fair process you get to, or it doesn't matter if you get all these like international awards and you get all these like fancy opportunities from these professors. What you're doing is you're starting a project, you're trying to solve a problem, and basically you're contributing to the research community worldwide. I think that's really what's important about STEM projects in general.
Yeah, science fairs is like so incredible, and you definitely will not regret doing it. So even just like trying to do something is incredible. So I don't think we have any other questions. So that's the end of today's session. If anybody thinks of questions later, just put them in the Discord and we'll try to find an answer. Thank you, Thong and Yuri, for all your amazing advice. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and for all your amazing questions. And we'll see you during our third STEM Fair workshop. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.